Okay.
Got those sound too?
Yes. Okay. And we go over here. All right. You can have that back in a minute.
I have this.
Wait. It's not focusing. All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'd like to talk to you today about peak oil. Unlike many doomsday myths, the peak oil crisis is an inescapable truth that poses a greater threat to our modern way of life than most of us realize. Many of you have probably heard the rumors about the planet's alleged imminent demise due to the fact that the Mayan calendar abruptly ends in 5 days. Predictions such as this have been proven wrong in the past. However, there is one serious threat to our existence that's been quietly lurking in the background for years: the peak oil crisis. This refers to when the world's production of oil peaks and will then decrease from that point, making oil more and more expensive as time goes on. In order to understand just how serious this urgent threat is to our way of life, let me provide you with a brief history of oil's discovery, production, and use. Since the first American oil field was founded in 1859, crude oil has been refined into fossil fuels. The need for oil production increased with the invention of combustion engines and then cars and trucks. Crude oil was refined into such products as gasoline, diesel fuel, and lubricants, and the demand for such products grew steadily for more than a century. From the 1930s to the early 70s, oil production levels reached their peak in the U.S., and many thought our supply would never end. By the 1980s, our country went from being the world's largest oil exporter to being the world's largest importer. In terms of global oil production, discoveries of new oil fields have dropped steadily since their peak over 50 years ago. As of today, experts insist that many of the world's largest oil fields have already passed their peak of production levels. Mexico, for example, which was once the world's largest oil exporters, admitted that within the next few years, it will start importing crude oil to meet rising demand for petroleum products. Once this happens, the U.S. will have lost its third largest oil supplier. Another example of how world demand for oil is rising while supplies are dwindling can be seen in China, where its use has grown by an astonishing 400% over the past 2 decades and is projected to match or surpass U.S. consumption rates sometime in the near future. In short, the peak oil crisis has been building up for more than 150 years. Since the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, our society has evolved into one that is totally dependent on having available, accessible, and affordable petroleum products. Can any of us imagine how different life would be if we didn't have enough oil to lubricate all the equipment used in today's modern factories? Also, consider how much our agricultural industry relies on fossil fuels to operate modern farm equipment, which handles most planting and harvesting tasks. Just for a moment, think of all the things we use that contain petroleum-based products and chemicals. Plastic toys, cell phones, clothing, blankets, and the very asphalt that's on our roadways today. Lastly, let's not forget about the amount of fossil fuels we use for transportation every day in this country. Not just for our daily commute, but for hauling goods from farms and factories and seaports to stores and warehouses. Last month, we all caught a glimpse of the kind of panic that can ensue if fuel shortages occur. New Jersey imposed an emergency gas rationing after Hurricane Sandy struck, which forced people to wait in long lines at the pump. To make matters worse, the U.S. Department of Energy recently stated that worldwide production of petroleum-based fuels is likely to drop over the next few years. So what solutions are available to help prevent peak oil crisis from reaching truly disastrous proportions? We've all heard about green technologies, right? Even though the use of such technologies has grown, the world's population will inevitably reach the point where the demand of oil will outpace Earth's limited supply. All of this naturally begs the question, what will we do when the peak oil crisis can no longer be ignored? Sadly, even now, with all our advanced technologies, there are still no good answers to this question. Furthermore, among the many ideas that have been proposed to help solve this crisis, some experts say they simply fail to provide any viable, long-term solutions. Some have suggested that we should rely more on nuclear energy. According to the Department of Energy, if we replace just half the fossil fuels in our country uses every day with nuclear energy, 750 more nuclear power plants would have to be built, which will require huge amounts of uranium, another natural resource that's in limited supply. Although wind power is a clean, renewable energy source, many agree it could never produce more than a fraction of the energy levels the world needs. Solar energy, perhaps, holds the greatest potential for helping to reduce global oil consumption. But just meeting the current energy demands of the U.S. alone would require covering an area half the size of California with solar panels, a task which certainly poses enormous practical and logistical problems. In conclusion, during the 21st century, our lives to undergo radical changes as we near the end of the petroleum age. Certainly, new scientific discoveries and the refinement of alternative energy sources may help ease the pain of this transition. But it's still uncertain whether they will ever replace the reliance on fossil fuels. So what can each of us do to help remove the sting of this impending crisis? First, we can all try to find new ways to limit our own oil consumption. Maybe by carpooling or taking mass transit, for example. Secondly, we can write to our congressmen and urge them to support funding for research for these alternative energies. And finally, we must spread the word about this problem and help people realize that the peak oil crisis isn't just another doomsday myth. It's a legitimate and serious threat to the way of life as we know it. Thank you.
Is it?
Turn it off.